finishing up the show with a look back at the Lakeside. It was the 2024 WDF World Championships last week, and Shane McGurk from Ireland winning the men's title, the first Irishman to win a senior World Darts Championship. A word on him, and also we've got to say a few words on the legend that is Paul Lim, reaching his first world final at 70 years of age.
I feel bad for Shane McGurk that Paul Lim is still such a big part of the story and still the leading part of the story because, well, I mean, it's Paul Lim. But at the same time, I think we need to start and finish this conversation, at least I need to, by talking about Shane McGurk, because he was the best player over the course of the week. And it's not like this was something that was close. He didn't drop a set until he was 2 sets away from winning the title. And okay, he probably should have dropped the first set in the final because Paul Lim had 5 darts to wrap it up and missed them all in that first set. But McGurk came back, took his chances, and then just blitzed through the next 3 sets to go 4 sets up in that match. And yes, he showed a little wobble in the 7th and 8th sets. He, missed some opportunities. His game definitely dropped off. Even the 9th set, his game was still dropped off until he was able to get that break and then finally find his throw in the middle of the second leg. They were both having a terrible set for the first leg and a half. But then he found it and he got over the line. But that doesn't detract from he was the best player. He only dropped 3 sets in the end. In the early rounds, he had the performance of the first round. Averaging 93 nearly against Mark Barilli, averaged 96 against Edwin Torbjornsson, destroyed the Australian 4th seed Brandon Weenie, again averaging well north of a 90, averaged under 90 against Peter Machin, but it was a match that was better than his average. He was averaging over 90 for much of it, and he just never gave Machin, the former World Trophy winner, a chance in that. And then in the semifinals, just absolutely hammered Francois Chouet, and he was averaging 94 for a while, went down a little in the end, still almost 93. Just over the course of the week, the best player. But Paul Lim was the story. And yeah, a bit fortunate at times. He got through marathon matches in almost every round. Went the distance against Lung Kai Fan. Went the distance against Gary Stone. Went the distance every set against the darts against Jarno Bottenberg before Jason Brandon just could not hit a double, losing 14 legs in a row. In what was not a high-quality semifinal. We can't pretend otherwise. And showed the fighting spirit in that final to get back in the match and to really put a level of interest and a level of attention on Lakeside that otherwise I don't think would have been there. There wasn't much media, but there was some media, at least in the mainstream British media, and it was all about Paul Lim. One story on Sky that was also about Bo Greaves before the final, but everything else was about Paul Lim. He was the face of this tournament. He was this tournament. And yes, he didn't win at the end, but he's what we're going to remember. But as I said, I'm going to start and finish talking about Shane McGurk because it would be rude to Shane McGurk not to talk about him. He was the best player. He's the deserved world champion. He's a player that on those performances shows that he's good enough to get into the PDC. Whether he's going to win a tour card is another question. What he's going to do with it, if he gets one, that's another question. But he's definitely good enough. Those performances over most of the rounds, especially over some of the longer matches, are bottom half of the PDC. But in this field, that's more than good enough. And you've got to think he has the game to lift himself, because he did lift himself when he had to make sure that he won this tournament. So I'm curious to see where he goes from here. He is now the WDF world champion. He's the Lakeside champion, and a deserved one at that.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And we're hopefully going to have a chat with Shane on the show in the coming weeks. And I'll start off with the winner, Shane McGurk, because as you say, a lot of the attention was on Paul Lim last week. A little bit like Littler and Humphreys in the PDC World Championship final in January. But instead of all the focus being on a 16-year-old, it was on a 70-year-old. That only happens in darts, doesn't it? But McGurk, a worthy winner. I said in the preview show for Lakeside, I wouldn't be surprised if someone starts in the first round and comes through that top half of the draw and makes the final. And in the end, It happened in both halves of the draw. Shane McGurk didn't drop a set on his way to the final, mirroring the late Eric Bristow, who was the only other player to achieve that feat in a men's World Championship. That was 40 years ago in 1984. And the second round game, worth a mention, against Edwin Thorbjornsen, 9 out of 9 on the doubles. The first time that's been done in a World Championship best of 5 sets match. And in those early rounds, it was Shane McGurk who was the one that was really catching the eye. He was posting the low to mid 90s averages consistently. There was under the 90 average against Peter Machin in the quarterfinals at an 89 average, but then back up into the 90s, and it was still a consistent level. And the final itself, it could have been a different story. Had Paul Lim took those set darts in the first set, McGurk won it, and I think it allowed him to settle, really. Raced into a 4-0 lead, kept the crowd quiet, and Lim, yes, he threatened that late comeback, got it back to 5-3, but McGurk had more than enough time to get the job done. And at 29 years of age, a lot of time ahead of him in the game. And you mentioned the PDC. You expect him to have another go at Q School next month to try and win his tour card. If he's not successful there, he's got a guaranteed spot at Lakeside next year to try and defend the title. And as for Paul Lim, I mean, what more else can we say that hasn't been said already? A legend, isn't he? And I only met him briefly for a couple of minutes whilst I was at Lakeside last week. It was after his second round win against Kai Fan Lung, and he kindly signed a few dart cases for me, but just an all-round top man. And this run, I think there's a lot of new darts fans this year who may not have heard of Paul Lim. Well, this run, it's introduced him to a whole new crop of fans, which I'm pleased about. And also for Paul as well, to have a run like he did in a World Championship, because before this, he'd made a quarterfinals once back in 1990 when he hit that 9-darter, and to have played now in 27 World Championships, I think he deserved a run like this to make a final. And if he'd have won the final, this show would have been the Paul Lim Appreciation Hour. We probably wouldn't have talked about Ali Pali and the PDC worlds, but I think to make the final at this point in his career, some of the games that he came through, that the late nights, the last set deciders, it was compelling viewing. And I know he said he's going to be back next year at Lakeside, but if this ends up being Paul Lim's last moment in the sun, going deep in the World Championships, then what a moment for all of us to share with him. And I think we're going to remember this for a long time as well.